Meridian is a 1985 novel by American author Cormac McCarthy. You see him there on the screen. It is thought by some to be the greatest American novel. Let's look today at his style. If it is the greatest American novel, it has to be because of his style and his thematic content. The theme of this particular novel, and they all kind of run similar, Blood Meridian, is to debunk the myth of universal order and to debunk the myth of the American cowboy. Wow, taking a shot at two very loved things. Let's start off with the main character, the kid. He's never given a name, the kid. In the end of the novel, he transforms to the man, but not until close to the very end. The novel chronicles the kid's journey, basically through life. The kid was born in 1833 under a meteor shower. His mother dies in childbirth, and he flees as young as 13, 14, 15 years old. He's a young man when he begins. He's very young. He flees his abusive father, but the kid has a propensity for violence, has a thirst for it. Very tough kid. He flees from Tennessee to Texas, to South Texas. And now here we are in the late 1840s. Just his journey to South Texas is harrowing. Now I want to tell you that myself, just like the eminent critic Harold Bloom, I had to put this thing down 3 times before I finally finished it the first time many years ago, because it is the most grotesquely violent thing I have ever witnessed. And yet, the writing is the most beautiful writing I have ever read. And I count this above Moby Dick. I count it above many Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare's drama, so it's not exactly the same, but this is, as far as prose, this is the most beautiful that I've read. Now, the violence is intertwined in there in such a way as to give it a certain meaning, a certain context. And wow, boy, does it. Cormac McCarthy is famous for saying, if the wager of any proposition is not death, it doesn't make sense to him. So he says he could never understand a novel where death wasn't on the line. Lots of death in Blood Meridian. The kid makes it to South Texas. He goes and he takes up with a Captain White. Now you got to remember that Alamo was in 1836 in Texas, and during the Alamo, of course, after the Alamo, General Sam Houston took back Texas from Santa Anna. And but there were still people who were sore. They're sore winners, as you say, sore about some of the land that they had wished we had gotten after the Alamo. So this Captain White is a member of the Army, but he has this irregular Army detachment. They're filibusters, and what they're going to do is they're going to go into Old Mexico and reclaim some of that land I'm talking about. Cross the Rio Grande and go and reclaim some of that land. Captain White has put together this kind of a ragtag bunch of ill-armed and ill-equipped irregular troops that haven't been trained very well at all. And he goes into Old Mexico, and that is when the kid hooks up with this group. The passage I want to read and analyze today comes from that moment. But moving on after that, the kid is arrested, and you'll see why in a minute, but he is arrested and taken to Chihuahua, Mexico. In Chihuahua, he meets one of the men that was in the Army with him under Captain White, and they too contract to get out of prison. They too contract with a John Joel Glanton. Now this Glanton is a scalp hunter. All right, that was bad. Indians then, we're talking late 1840s, the Comanche especially, were marauding, were taking scalps, were killing everyone that they could imagine, torturing them to death in the most horrible ways that you can imagine. And so the Mexican government decided a good thing to do would be to hire a bunch of real hard types to go out after the Indians, to go after them. And for every scalp they took, every Indian scalp they took, they would get a certain amount of money. This is what John Joel Glanton's group did, his gang, if you will. Tovide and the kid joined the gang. The book chronicles the perverse massacres that ensue after this. After a while, to them, it doesn't seem to matter whether it's an Indian scalp or a Native American scalp or just man, woman, child. It's a scalp's a scalp. So they take over and slaughter whole cities. That's what the book is about, basically. But weaving his way through all that is the most wonderfully delicious villain I've ever seen. His name is Judge Holden. Now, Judge Holden is this, he's a monster. He's 6'5" at least, maybe pushing 7 feet tall. He's hairless, bald, fat, very fat, hairless and cadaverously white. Wow. He possesses knowledge and an intellect in all areas, and talent in all areas. He can dance, he can fiddle, he can do everything. He has seemingly superhuman strength and education and everything from, like I said, dance to science to astronomy to archaeology, scripture, sculpture, the arts, everything. So the whole time, as a reader, and both as a reader and the characters, you're not quite sure whether he's real, whether he's a human or maybe some sort of demon or demigod or some sort of genie, some sort of jinn. And in one incident that's very famous from the book, he and a group of men are fleeing the Apaches, and they find an area where there's some natural resources next to a volcano, and he takes his men up there. They're out of ammo. They don't have any ammo, and he goes up there, and the judge makes gunpowder from the natural elements, and then they fend off the Apaches. The judge is socially refined. He is extremely well educated, almost omniscient at times, but he is remarkably violent, perverted, evil, fatalistic. He kind of sums himself up by his quotation: "War is God." Now, the judge does not appear in this section, but you'll get the point. This is after the kid has taken up with Captain White and has crossed the Rio Grande into Old Mexico to take back land. They rode through regions of party-colored stone, upthrust in ragged kerfs, and shelves of trap rock reared in faults and anticlines curved back upon themselves, and broken off like stumps of great stone tree boles, and stones the lightning had clove open, seeps exploding in steam in some old storm. They rode past trap dikes of brown rock running down the narrow chines of the ridges and onto the plain, like the ruins of old walls, such auguries everywhere of the hand of man before man was or any living thing. They passed through a village then and now in ruins, and they camped in the walls of a tall mud church and burned the fallen timbers of the roof for their fire while owls cried from the arches above. The following day, on the skyline to the south, they saw clouds of dust that lay across the earth for miles. They rode on, watching the dust until it began to near, and the captain raised his hand for a halt and took from his saddlebag his old brass cavalry telescope and uncoupled it and swept it slowly over the land. The sergeant sat his horse beside him, and after a while the captain handed him the glass. "Hell of a herd of something." "I believe it's horses." "How far off do you make them?" "Hard to tell." "Call Candelario up here." The sergeant turned and motioned for the Mexican. When he rode up, he handed him the glass, and the Mexican raised it to his eye and squinted. Then he lowered the glass and watched with his naked eyes, and then he raised it again and looked again. Then he sat his horse with the glass at his chest like a crucifix. "Well," said the captain. He shook his head. "What the hell does that mean? They're not buffalo, are they?" "No, I think maybe horses." "Let me have the glass." The Mexican handed him the telescope, and he glassed the horizon again and collapsed the tube shut with the heel of his hand and replaced it in his bag and raised his hand, and they went on. They were cattle, mules, horses. There were several thousand head, and they were moving quarterwise toward the company. By late afternoon, riders were visible to the bare eye, a handful of ragged Indians mending the outer flanks of the herd with their nimble ponies. Others in hats, perhaps Mexicans. The sergeant dropped back to where the captain was riding. "What do you make of that, Captain?" "I make it a parcel of heathen stock thieves, is what I make it. What do you?" "It looks like it to me." The captain watched through his glass. "I suppose they've seen us," he said. They've seen us." "How many riders do you make it?" A dozen, maybe?" The captain tapped the instrument in his gloved hand. "They don't seem concerned, do they?" "No, sir, they don't." The captain smiled grimly. "We may see a little sport here before the day is out." The first of the herd began to swing past them in a pall of yellow dust. Rangy, slat-ribbed cattle with horns that grew a goggle, and no two alike, and small, thin mules, coal-back, that shouldered one another and reared their mallet-shaped heads above the backs of the others, and then more cattle, and finally, the first of the herders riding up the other side and keeping the stock between themselves and the mounted company. Behind them came a herd of several hundred ponies. The sergeant looked for Candelario. He kept backing along the ranks, but he could not find him. He nudged his horse through the column and moved up the far side. The lattermost of the drovers were now coming through the dust, and the captain was gesturing and shouting. The ponies had begun to veer off from the herd, and the drovers were beating their way toward this armed company met with on the plain. Already, you could see through the dust on the ponies' hides the painted chevrons and the hands and rising suns and birds and fish of every device, like the shade of old work through sizing on canvas. And now, too, you could hear, above the pounding of the unshod hooves, the piping of the cayena, flutes made from human bones. And some among the company had begun to saw back on their mounts, and some to mill in confusion, when, up from the off side of those ponies, there rose a fabled horde of mounted lancers and archers, bearing shields bedight with bits of broken mirror glass that cast 1,000 unpieced suns against the eyes of their enemies. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes Attic or biblical, or wardrobed out of a fevered dream with the skins of animals and silk finery, and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners, coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat, and one with an umbrella, and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some in headgear of crane feathers or rawhide helmets that bore the horns of bull or buffalo, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards and otherwise naked, and one in the armor of a Spanish conquistador, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of mace or saber, done in another country by men whose very bones were dust, and many with their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts, until they trailed upon the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque with daubings, like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious, all howling in a barbarous tongue and riding down upon them like a horde from hell more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and clothed in smoke like the vaporous beings in regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wonders and the lip jerks and drools. "Oh my God," said the sergeant. A rattling drove of arrows passed through the company, and men tottered and dropped from their mounts. Horses were rearing and plunging, and the mongrel hordes swung up along their flanks and turned and rode full upon them with lances. The company was now come to a halt, and the first shots were fired, and the gray rifle smoke rolled through the dust as the lancers breached their ranks. The kid's horse sank beneath him with a long pneumatic sigh. He had already fired his rifle, and now he sat on the ground and fumbled with his shot pouch. A man near him sat with an arrow hanging out of his neck. He was bent slightly, as if in prayer. The kid would have reached for the bloody hoop iron point, but then he saw that the man wore another arrow in his breast to the fletching, and he was dead. Everywhere there were horses down and men scrambling, and he saw a man who sat charging his rifle while blood ran from his ears. And he saw men with their revolvers disassembled, trying to fit the spare loaded cylinders they carried. And he saw men kneeling, who tilted and clasped their shadows on the ground. And he saw men lanced and caught up by the hair and scalped, standing. And he saw the horses of war trample down upon the fallen, and a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. Among the wounded, some seemed dumb and without understanding, and some were pale through the masks of dust, and some had fouled themselves or tottered brokenly into the spears of the savages, now driving in a wild frenzy of headlong horses with eyes walled and teeth cropped, and naked riders with clusters of arrows clenched in their teeth, and their shields winking in the dust, and up the far side of the ruined ranks in a piping of bone flutes, and dropping down off the sides of their mounts with one heel hung in the wither strap, and their short bows flexing beneath the outstretched necks of their ponies until they had circled the company and cut their ranks in two. And then, rising up again like funhouse figures, some with nightmare faces painted on their breasts, riding down the unhorsed Saxons and spearing and clubbing them, and leaping from their mounts with knives, and running about on the ground with a particular bandy-legged trot like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion, and stripping the clothes from the naked, and seizing them up by the hair and passing the blades about the skulls of the living and dead alike, and snatching aloft the bloody wigs, and hacking and chopping the naked bodies, ripping off limbs, heads, gutting the strange white torsos, and holding up great handfuls of viscera, genitals. Some of the savages so slathered up with gore they might have rolled in it like dogs, and some who fell upon the dying and sodomized them with loud cries to their fellows. And now the horses of the dead came pounding out of the smoke and dust, and circled with flapping leather and wild manes, and eyes whited with fear like the eyes of the blind. And some were feathered with arrows, and some lanced through and stumbling and vomiting blood as they wheeled across the killing ground and clattered from sight again. Dust stanched the wet and naked heads of the scalped, who, with the fringe of hair below their wounds and torsoed to where the bone now lay like maimed and naked monks in the blood-slaked dust, and everywhere the dying groaned, gibbered, and horses lay screaming. The most important axiom in creative writing, in writing literature, is show, don't tell. So you want to show the action. Your goal is to have your reader live it, to see it, to hear it, to feel the pounding of the unshod hooves. But there's more to it. Many writers try to do that. They try to show with adjectives, descriptive words. So they'll get caught up describing a sunset, how it was, how it looked. The sun was red with tinges of yellow, and okay. Well, no. And then other, even a worse technique is to use adverbs. The horse ran quickly. Well, no one can envision quickly. What does quickly mean? It doesn't mean anything. It means at a fast rate, but you can't see it. You can't feel it. So Cormac McCarthy, I think the hallmark of his style, he has a few main things that really set him apart. But I think the hallmark of his style, and something all writers can learn from him, is to use sensory details to show the scene. Don't tell it, show it. And use sensory details, but do it with verbs. Verbs. Active verbs. Strong verbs. Verbs you don't forget. So let's take a moment here. At this first part right here. This very first part here, he sets the landscape in motion. He is describing a landscape, but he sets it in motion. They rode through regions of party-colored stone. And while we're here, let's talk about party-colored. I mean, he's very hesitant to use traditional adjectives. Red, yellow, whatever. If it's red, he says blood red. But in this case, party-colored. Party-colored is all the red, yellow, green, blue, all the colors that you would have at a party. This is the confetti color. That is a hallmark of something, of the way that he thinks that's so unique. Party-colored stone. And this stone, see, here's the beginning of he sets it into motion. It is upthrust. It is upthrust in ragged kerfs and shelves of trap rock reared. It's reared in faults. Now, he is very crafty. None of this is by accident. Faults, I believe, is kind of a double entendre. He is sort of talking about the hubris of mankind, the faults of mankind, if you will. And he uses the landscape to emulate that. The two are parallel. In faults, double entendre, maybe a pun. And anticlines. What is anti? You think of anti-Christ? Anticlines curved back upon themselves. I don't know, but back upon yourself is not good in any kind of way. And broken off. It's the curved. See how it's in motion? Curved. And broken off. And the stones that the lightning had clove open. See that you can almost see that lightning, and it opens the stone like so. And then the seeps of pieces of stone evaporating, I assume, the seeps exploding in steam in some old storm. Wow, he set that into motion for us, but also this word clove. What is clove? Cloven feet, cloven hoofs. Oh, the devil. Okay. So already he sets this tone, this ominous, foreboding tone, the tone of imminent peril. Just with the first sentence. They rode. This is always in motion. See the verbs. They rode. The rock was running down the narrow chines of the ridges and into the plain. Like such auguries everywhere of the hand of man before man was or any living thing. Now I want you to key in on this. It doesn't necessarily go with our verb discussion, but the auguries. What is that? An augury is an omen. It's a sign, something that harkens times to come, something to come. An augury, almost a prophetic announcement. So this landscape that's in such motion, it's party-colored stone upthrusting and exploding from lightning and inclining back upon itself, and it's broken and it's rearing up. This landscape is like a omen, and it's an augury, but it's an omen of the coming of man before man was or any living thing. So it's as if the landscape, the earth, if you will, the earth was here waiting for man before we got here, and it knew our bloody history and the trajectory of our world before even we did. All right, so we're moving on to the second page here. Still following our show, don't tell, but use active verbs idea. And this is hallmark of Cormac McCarthy's style. We have this long paragraph here. The first of the herd began to swing past them in a pall of yellow dust. The horns, now he's describing cattle, but he's describing them in an active way. He's describing how their horns grew. So it's not a descriptive word. Oh, they were pretty awkward looking. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. In this case, he says, with horns that grew a goggle. He placed it in motion with the verb grew. And no two alike. And then these little mules, coal back, that shouldered one another and reared their mallet-shaped heads. Okay, so see how he placed that in motion right there? They shouldered one another and reared their heads. And then the horsemen were riding. They were riding down on them. And even when we begin to see the horses of the actual Comanche Indians down here, already you could see through the dust on the ponies' hides, the painted chevrons, and the hands, and the rising suns. So he even places that in motion. The suns on the side of the ponies are rising. You feel this inertia start to begin. And now we have above the pounding of the unshod hooves, the piping of the cayenne flutes. So you're hearing it. He's making you hear it. Sensory details, active verbs. You hear it. You hear over the pounding of the what type of hooves? Unshod, wild, barbaric, native. Unshod hooves, the piping of the cayenne flutes. Flutes made from human bones. Okay, now we have, this dark, ominous feeling coming back. Human bones. They're actually playing a tune on the bones of the last people that they have killed. Yes, and then the company began to saw back on their mounts. See that saw? They're sawing back on their mounts. A much less capable rider might say, the company began to hesitate. No, they sawed back on their mount. You could see that. And some to mill. See this? To mill in confusion. We can see milling. It's like, I don't know, just milling around, not knowing what to do. This fabled horde of mounted lancers and archers rose up. And notice right here, the alliteration. They're bearing them. They are shields. They are bearing shields bedight with bits of broken glass. See, ba, 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 ba. And it almost makes you think of the sound like, ba, 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 ba. You see an image like that. Oh, ba, 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 ba. Bearing shields bedight with bits of broken mirror glass that cast. See that verb? Cast 1,000 unpieced suns against the eyes of their enemies. Whew. Okay, sticking with the verbs. Now he's talking about the armor of the Spanish conquistador. He can't just leave it at, there was this one Indian, he was wearing armor, conquistador. No. He has to put that armor into motion and say, That armor was deeply dented with old blows of mace or saber done in another country by men whose very bones were dust. See all of that motion that he placed in there? There's of this armor here, dented, and see all of that motion? Yeah. You almost see the entire history of that armor. The Spanish, in your mind, by saying this, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented by old blows of mace or saber done in another country by men whose very bone. You feel the entire history of that armor, and you feel our little piece, our little tiny sliver of time where we live, and how insignificant it is to the overall drama of the human race, I assume. And then we have the Indians whose braids are spliced up. You could say a less effective writer could say the Indians had very long hair made with other hair from other beasts. No, they spliced them up, and even that word spliced sounds a lot like sliced. I mean, it's just not a happy word. You don't go to sleep going spliced, spliced, spliced. It fits this tone. It fits this ethic, this ethos here, okay? So let's go with the tails were worked. They were worked with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose whole horse's head was painted crimson red. It wasn't just red. He didn't just have a red horse's head. It was painted that way. Like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious. And now, they're certainly in motion here, howling in a barbarous tongue and riding down upon them like a horde from hell more horrible than the land of Christian. They're screeching and they're yammering and clothed in smoke. Not their clothes looked like smoke. No, they are actively, this is a verb, clothed. They are clothed in smoke like those vaporous beings in regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wanders, the lip jerks and drools. Wow. Who are these vaporous beings? I can see them. I don't know who they are, but I can see them, and they're horrible. They're horrible. And then there's even a little bit of humor here. Oh my God, said the sergeant. Yeah, oh my God. All right, and then we go, the horses again. These horses the men are tottering from their mounts. The horses are rearing and plunging, and turn and rode upon them full with lances. Okay, and of course right here, this last paragraph, oh gosh, where to even start, Men clasped at their shadows on the ground, like grasping for anything. Other men were caught up by the hair. They weren't just scalped. You've heard scalped a lot. Oh, yeah, they was scalped. It was pretty bad. But when you think of being caught up by the hair and scalped, standing, even standing, the gerund form of stand. So, this is all in motion. And he saw the horses of war trample down the fallen. And here it is. And a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. First of all, it's funny, You can see that. You can see that pony. But second of all, look at the emotion McCarthy has put this into. He could have just said, yeah, there was this little white pony that jumped out. And a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. Almost like an alien from Aliens. Right? All right, good. And then this is what the Comanche Indians actually did. They were able to put one foot in the wither strap and shoot their bows from underneath the necks of their horses, little Spanish ponies. This is it right here. Some of the greatest, the Comanche Indians were probably the world's greatest cavalry. I put them beyond the mongrels of China. I put them beyond anyone. They were fabulous horsemen. It's like Nunema. That's what they were before. Nunema, the Nunema Indians. Nunema. meet the horse. It was a marriage made in heaven, hell, I don't know. Some with nightmare faces, painted, riding down the unhorsed Saxons and spearing and clubbing them and leaping from their mounts with knives and running about on the ground. With that, running about, sure that's kind of common, but with that particular bandy-legged trot. That's it. You can see that, can't you? You can see that particular bandy-legged trot. Like what? Like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion. Now I want you to notice he'll always have a very active verb, a very, very interesting pairing of maybe an adjective and a very active, precise verb. And then he will have a simile. He'll have a simile right after it, like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion. And then here's the other active verb. And stripping the clothes from the dead and seizing them up by the hair and passing their blades about the skulls. They're passing the blades about the living and the dead alike. And then here comes lots of emotion. Hacking and chopping, snatching, ripping, gutting, holding up. They're so slathered. They're slathered. They could have rolled in it like dogs. And some who fell upon the dying and sodomized them with loud cries to their fellows. Wow! And now the horses of the dead came pounding. They weren't running or trotting, or they were pounding out of the smoke and dust and circled with flapping leather and wild. Okay, you get it. And even in the end, you have the blood slaked. He coins words like that all the time. Blood slaked. Even the dust is put into motion. It's not just dust. It's blood slaked. Kind of a verb. So he puts that into motion. And then, of course, everywhere the dying lay, they're groaning and gibbering, and the horses are screaming. So that's it. All through his writing is particularly identified with this technique of setting motion. Making even the seemingly most common scene, setting it into motion, and from that motion, interweaving into that motion incredibly precise verbs. The horse didn't walk; it skittered, something like that. Weaving into that motion very precise active verbs, and in the midst of that, adding very unusual adjectives like blood slaked, also like blood red, also like party colored, not just regular adjectives, but just very unique adjectives like that. And in the midst of all that, then following it up with a simile, like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious. Wow. Yeah, in analyzing literature, there's lots of different ways you can go with it. I have this wheel that I created here. And basically anything on this wheel you can use, and more. It's not limited to this, but this is a good beginning place for all the different pieces that you can use to analyze literature. So I'll try to make that like that and put it over here. All right, so I think we must talk about sentences. His sentence structure is very unique. Now, we all know that if you want to write a sentence, that there are certain rules, and one of them is that an independent clause such as I hit the ball. That is called an independent clause. It is a group of words with a subject and a verb that can stand alone as a full sentence. Now, if you want to join two independent clauses, the rules say that you have to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. and I ran the bases. So here we have the first independent clause, and here we have the second independent clause. All right, now if you do this, that's called a comma splice. That's a specific type of run-on sentence. All right. Also, if you do this, that's a run-on sentence too. A run-on sentence is not a sentence that is long. No, it's not a long sentence. It's not a sentence that runs on. You can have properly punctuated sentences that are 100 words long. A run-on sentence is two independent clauses joined improperly. And there are but two ways to join sentences. It is with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or a semicolon. Now you're not going to see that. People don't use semicolons. They have a really bad rep for whatever reason. Now, after I have harped on my English professor stuff there, Cormac McCarthy takes that rule and wads it up and throws it away. So we're going to go to the second right here. Let's analyze this sentence right here. The first of the herd began to swing past them in a pall of yellow dust, comma. Rangy, slat-ribbed cattle with horns that grew a goggle. And this is fine because it's like in a positive. This is a comma. This is so far so good. And small thin mules coal-backed that shouldered one another and reared their mallet-shaped heads above the backs of the others. And then more cattle, and finally the first of the herders riding up the other side and keeping the stock between themselves and the mounted company. All right. This whole thing is one sentence. This whole thing is one long sentence. Yes, indeed. And Cormac McCarthy, he knows his grammar. He's not making mistakes. This thing has been through so many editors, you can't even imagine. And I bet every one of them said, "Yeah, you need a comma here." He's like, no. So he knows what he's doing. What he's doing, I'm not sure. We're going to work it out. But he knows, and it's not an error. He spells the word blood red two different ways on one page. He knows what he's doing. So you have to ask yourself, what does this mean? Now, look. Okay, let's see if we can turn on this is from right here to here. It says 74 words. Okay, good. But there are several ideas crammed into there. And I think in this one case, his grammar is proper. He's got it because he's using it in a positive. All of this. Yep, even though there are many verbs in there, all of this is a renaming or another way to name the herd. Wow. But see how his sentences are very long? Cormac McCarthy seems to get in kind of a flow state when he writes, which is the goal. But he gets in this flow state, and when he does, it's almost an effusion, like the birds sing. It comes to him in that way. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes Attic or biblical, or wardrobe out of a fevered dream with the skins of animals and silk finery and pieces of uniforms still tracked with the blood of their prior owners, coats of slain dragoon, frogged and braided cavalry, one in a stovetop. Okay, let's keep going. Blood-stained wedding veil, head cane, da-da-da-da-da-da, and one da-da-da, conquistador, da-da-da-da, oh gosh, and pauldrons, oh wow, oh man, here we go, oh goodness, trails of beasts, keep going. Death, hilarious. Oh gosh. This is one. Oh gosh. That's one sentence. Oh my god. All right. So let's talk about this sentence right here. This is a. Oh, let me get it. It is a 246 word sentence right here. 246 words right here. It is a, come back here. It is a fragment. It's a fragment. It's not a complete thought. Even though there are many, many, many verbs in there, it's not a proper sentence structure. He starts off with a legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes, Attic or biblical or wardrobe. And we did all that. We went through, and he goes through, and this is a long series. It's items in series, and he is describing all of these different Indians, but there is not a proper sentence structure to it. It is a fragment. It is a 246-word fragment. I tell you all of this to tell you that Cormac McCarthy, if you want to analyze his style, you have to analyze the sentences. His sentences are long and grammatically incorrect. However, I believe it's the pinnacle of writing. He makes it work. He makes it work. He makes it work. Let's see what else we can, and like I said a minute ago, he does not adhere to the independent clause rule. He bucks the whole system. But let's look. How about imagery? Did you see any imagery in there? Yes, absolutely. How about when they rose up? The company cut their ranks in two, and then rising up again like funhouse figures. Like funhouse figures. You notice that? He's got the verb, he's got a particular adjective, and then a very precise verb, and then a simile. And the simile usually knocks your socks off. Rising up like funhouse figures. And then the let's see, stand by. In the previous page here, death hilarious. This is that same long fragment. And all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque with daubings, like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious. Oh my gosh. Okay, so check it. When you have items in series, your 5th grade English teacher told you, when you have items in series, you have to separate them all with commas. But does he do that? No. He uses his coordinating conjunctions here to just let it roll, so that it just rolls, and that reinforces the motion of the piece. That it reinforces the whose very bones were dust, and many with their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts until they trailed on the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque with daubings like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious. Okay, so he just strings it all together. Long sentences. Not actually grammatically correct, usually, but very, very well crafted, very precise. Now let's talk about his conventions. Of course, the imagery is just there. The imagery is everywhere. You can see them piping the Cayenne flutes. We can see these mallet-shaped mules. We can see the Comanche coming over that hill with their shields with broken glass on. We can definitely see all of these Comanche Indians here with stovepipe hats, dead brides' wedding veils. Whew, you can see all that. Here in the end, you can see the dust-stanched bodies and the scalped. And look at this. Here's a word, tonsured. This is the tonsure, which is the bald part of a monk's head. Wow. That's what I'm talking about with very, very precise diction. So he has very precise diction, very active verbs used to show sensory details. He uses imagery like fun house figures, usually uses similes to indicate this imagery, like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious. That would be a metaphor. They are death hilarious. The eyes of the blind, like the eyes of the blind. Yeah, So he uses active verbs, he uses precise diction, he uses similes, he uses metaphors, and conventions. I want you to notice a few things. It's not exactly evident from this piece, but here, he uses the apostrophe correctly. It's great. Well, wonderful. Down here, he uses there somewhere, and he uses the apostrophe correctly. They're not buffalo, are they? Yeah, he uses that just fine. But look here. Don't. Now you have to ask yourself, why does he? It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. He doesn't. The word can't, don't, things, those words, and more. He doesn't use the apostrophe. You have to ask yourself why, and I think it's because of this. The book itself is meant to debunk the myth of universal order, that there is someone looking out for you, that things make sense, that everything happens for a reason, that you have fate, some sort of fate that you're supposed to fulfill, that maybe even that there's God watching out for us, and that God has control and there is structure to this universe. This book debunks that idea. And so how do you show it? You show it in many ways through the plot and through the characters and all that. But one other way he shows it is through his radical misuse of grammatic conventions like don't. All right, so to bring this to a close, Cormac McCarthy, his style is very unique and very effective, and he does what he does through the use of very active verbs. He adheres to the show don't tell axiom by employing sensory details that apply to your senses. However, not just static, he makes the scene, he puts the scene in motion and describes the motion. And within that motion, he usually has a very precise adjective to describe a very, very impactful verb, usually very unique, skittered. The horse skittered, right? And then after that, he usually has a very haunting simile, like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious. And then, in the midst of all that, he uses long, flowing sentences without a whole lot of commas to interrupt the flow, without a whole lot of stopping or pausing or anything. It's just an infusion, like a flow state. And his sentences are generally very long, like we saw the 246-word fragment. He uses very, very unique verbs. He coins some very unique words. He coins some of his own words, makes them up. And he does all this. As he's doing all this, he sets a tone. It all sets this tone of a deep, foreboding tone of imminent peril. He uses symbolism of all kinds, like Candelario when he puts the telescope across his chest like a crucifix, bringing in that religious imagery, like the men were with the arrows in them were bent over slightly as if in prayer. Brings in all kinds of symbolism and he sets his settings. He sets it into motion and makes it an omen. And he includes very, very interesting details, like the bits of mirror glass, like some of the more horrific scenes in this. And of course, imagery. The imagery is spectacular. You can see the painted chevrons. You can see the rising suns. You can see the particular bandy leg trot. And in all that, Cormac McCarthy, I think, is the greatest living, maybe the greatest American writer. I mean, we have authors that wrote better stories. Sure, The Great Gatsby is more fun, so, okay, well, great. Moby Dick even. I mean, Cormac McCarthy, he may not ever win the Nobel Prize simply because he wrote about necrophilia at one point. His subjects are very dark, very, very dark. This is scalp hunting. But nonetheless, his writing, much like Lolita, The subject is horrible, but the writing is spectacular. And that's not why I say Cormac McCarthy, in my view, is America's greatest writer as far as style.